They couldn't believe when their most hated orange alien dragon shook TH. The colony of Nerilia, for had a saying, "Beware the orange scales, for they bring only fire." It was an old proverb, whispered to children before bedtime and carved into metallic archways of the settlement walls. To the human colonists, it wasn't just folklore, it was survival advice. Because beyond the domes and the biofarms of their fragile colony lurked a creature so universally despised that even uttering its name brought unease. The orange alien dragon, known as Vortis, was more than a predator. He was a nightmare that had burned their skies, toppled their machinery, and stolen their livestock for decades. And yet, one day, Vortis would do something that not a single colonist could ever have imagined. He would reach out, not with claws or flames, but with a trembling hand. Beginning, hatred carved in fire. Nerilia, for it had been colonized nearly 80 years earlier, when Earth's corporations sold dreams of fertile alien land to desperate families. The truth was harsher. The soil was barely arable. Storms raged unpredictably, and dragons, unlike anything humans had ever seen, ruled the wilderness. Most dragons were cautious, keeping their distance. They observed humans from afar, but rarely attacked. But Vortis, the orange-scaled terror, had been different from the start. With a wingspan larger than a shuttle and flames hot enough to melt through armored harvesters, he targeted supply caravans, shredded solar towers, and even attacked the dome habitats when hunger drove him wild. His attacks cost lives. 39 colonists over the decades, not to mention countless cattle and harvested crops. The colonists adapted, building plasma turrets, learning to fight, and assigning entire squads to dragon defense. Children grew up with drills. If you see orange scales, run. To them, Vortis was not just an animal. He was a villain, and no one hated him more than Commander Ilera Jansen. Ilera had lost her brother in Vortis's second great raid, when the dragon tore open a dome and incinerated 3 dwellings. Her brother had been among those trapped. Since then, Ilera had risen to the militia ranks, fueled by one obsession: to one day in Vortis's reign of terror. She had seen the dragon up close twice. Once as a young soldier, when his wing beats toppled her squad's armored vehicle. And again 10 years later, when she fired a railgun shot that barely grazed his shoulder. Each time, she remembered his eyes, bright, alien, but disturbingly intelligent. Still, intelligence or not, he was a monster in her mind. Nothing more. Middle, the unthinkable encounter. It was during the season of red storms that everything changed. The storm swept down from Nerilia IV's northern mountains, shredding crops and cutting off supply lines. Colonists huddled inside domes, praying protective barriers would hold. Ilera's squad was dispatched to the outer ridge to repair a plasma turret knocked offline by lightning. Without it, the western settlement would be vulnerable. She went with 5 soldiers, armored suits glinting in the stormlight. But when they arrived at the ridge, they weren't alone. Vortis was there. The massive dragon crouched on the jagged rocks, wings folded tight against his body. But his posture was strange. He wasn't stalking. He wasn't roaring. He wasn't even breathing fire. He was shaking. Ilera froze. Her rifle's targeting scope locked onto the dragon's chest, and instinct screamed to fire. Her squad raised their weapons, the hiss of plasma cells charging, piercing the storm's howl. But then, Vortis did something no one expected. He extended his foreclaw, slowly, deliberately, and touched the ground. His claws curled into a fist. Then, against all reason, he raised that massive forelimb and shook it. It wasn't a strike. It wasn't a threat. It was the unmistakable gesture humans use to seal agreements, to bridge divides. A handshake. The squad faltered. Soldiers looked at one another, unsure if they were hallucinating in the storm. Ilera's finger hovered over the trigger. Everything inside her screamed that this was a trick, some mockery, some trap. But then she noticed something she had never seen before. The dragon scales, usually gleaming and polished like firelit armor, were dulled, cracked. His wings trembled, as if holding himself upright was a struggle. And his eyes, those burning alien eyes, were dimmed, laced with pain. He wasn't here to attack. He was here because he was dying. The uneasy alliance. "Commander, your orders?" One soldier barked through the comms. "Do we fire?" Ilera's throat tightened. Logic said yes. Here was their chance. Kill the hated beast, and decades of terror. But something in her gut stopped her. Instead, she lowered her rifle. "Hold fire," she said. Her squad gaped. "But—" I said, "Hold." The storm thundered around them. But in that moment, the only sound was the ragged wheeze of the dragon. Vorthus leaned forward, lowering his massive head until his snout was inches from the ground. Then, with a groan that rattled the ridge, he collapsed onto his side. The soldiers took a step back in shock. Elara stared at him, tried to reconcile everything she knew. The fires, the destruction, the countless funerals with the reality before her. Vorthus wasn't attacking. He was surrendering. And then she saw it, protruding from between the scales near his chest. A jagged piece of metal, glowing faintly with alien energy. It pulsed like a parasite, and the flesh around it was charred. This wasn't natural. Someone had wounded him. Not just wounded, weaponized him. Revelations in the storm. Against every instinct, Elara approached. The heat radiating from the dragon's body was intense, but weaker than she remembered. His eyes tracked her, but there was no malice, only exhaustion. She studied the shard embedded in his chest. It looked almost like human tech, an energy conduit, but twisted, fused with alien biology. It pulsed in rhythm with his heartbeat. Elara, one of her soldiers, warned, "Step back. That thing's killed dozens of us. We can finish it now." But Elara shook her head. "No, look at this. Someone put this inside him." The realization struck her cold. What if Vorthus hadn't been attacking them by choice? What if he had been controlled? And the only ones on Aurelia, for capable of such technology, were not dragons. They were human. The truth. Back in the colony, doctors and engineers confirmed her fears. The shard was an experimental control device, one that had been abandoned years ago. A secret project by the first corporations who colonized the planet. They had attempted to weaponize the dragons, turning them into living siege beasts to defend settlements or wage wars. Vorthus had been their prime subject. When the project collapsed, they left him broken with the control shard still embedded. Every attack, every raid, every firestorm had been a command he couldn't resist. The hatred of an entire generation had been built on a lie. Turning point. When news spread, the colony fractured. Some refused to believe it. They insisted Vorthus was a monster, shard or no shard. Others argued that if he had been controlled, then he was as much a victim as a colonist. Elara found herself at the center of the storm. She, who had hated him most, was now the one standing guard as doctors attempted to remove the shard. The operation nearly killed him. His body convulsed, flames erupting uncontrollably as the shard was pried free. But when it was finally removed, Vorthus lay still, his chest rising and falling with slow, natural breaths. For the first time in 80 years, he was free. And when he opened his eyes again, the first being he looked at was Elara. He extended his claw once more, trembling, uncertain, but unmistakably an offer. This time, Elara reached out, and with her gloved hand, she shook it, ending a new legend. The colony never saw Vorthus the same way again. Some still feared him, but others began to see him differently. He no longer circled their skies as a terror. Instead, he lingered near the outskirts, watching, guarding. When raiders from rival colonies tried to steal supplies, it was Vorthus who descended, scattering them with a roar. When storms toppled domes, it was his wings that shielded survivors until repairs arrived. The children who once feared orange scales now drew them in murals, painting him as a guardian rather than a monster. Elara often stood at the ridge, watching him. She still carried scars of the past, still mourned her brother and the others lost. Forgiveness was not simple, but when she looked into Vorthus's eyes now, she saw not fire and fury, but a creature who had suffered just as much as they had. One evening, as the twin moons rose over Aurelia, for Vorthus landed near the colony walls. His massive head lowered, and once again he extended his claw. This time not in pain, not in surrender, but in friendship. Elara placed her hand against it, and the people of Aurelia forgathered to witness. The colony's old proverb was rewritten. No longer, beware the orange scales, for they bring only fire. Now it was, trust the orange scales, for they shook our hand. And so, the most hated alien dragon became their most unlikely protector, because once, against all odds, He had shaken hands instead of striking,